Mandala, the third dimension, the city. This will be in 4 parts, 4 DVDs. The ancient development of the village, the town, the city, people congregating together more and more, is most significant in the evolution of human consciousness. The circular and symbolic city has a long history, going back to prehistoric Mesopotamia, with clearly defined circumferences and sacred centers. Symbolism in real or ideal form. Circumferences and sacred centers. We will consider 4 basic groupings first. Prehistoric and historic round towns of the Middle East, all built, but all in ruins, really. Ideal and utopian cities of Europe, all unbuilt. Round cities of the European Renaissance, built but utopic. Utopias in literature, not built and not round. These may relate historically to a circular township in South India being built as an experimental ideal. Excavations in the Middle East are creating some new ways of thinking about our ancient cultural history. We'll look at 7 cities, prehistoric and historic, dating from 5900 before the Common Era up to the mid-700s, all in ruins. We follow first the thought of Joseph Campbell, the mythologist and cultural historian, who wrote, "The whole city is now conceived as an imitation on earth of the celestial order, a sociological middle cosmos between the macrocosm of the universe and the microcosm of the individual." The essential form, he says, involves a center represented symbolically by the king or sun with a spiritual sanctum, originally in the shape of a temple or ziggurat rising high. And for the outer part and circumference there is an organization of the walled city in the manner of a mandala. So a central temple tower and the spiritually or hieratically organized city surrounding it, Campbell says, is where everyone plays a role according to a celestially inspired divine plan. So here we have the biblical image of Eden, from which the medieval concept was developed, he wrote, and which would have been created just about at the same time of the founding of the first Sumerian towns in Mesopotamia. So let's explore the history of the city as mandala, with its round circumference and the essential sacred center as sanctuary, temple, mosque, or church. So many early cities like these became influential forerunners of proposed and actually built later ones, precursors, antecedents. Dawn of the city. Excavations prompt a revolution in thinking about the earlier cities. There have been several significant ancient towns in the Middle East designed and built in this way, but all are in ruins now. Ubaid and Eridu, Brak, Firuzabad, Darabgerd, Takht-e-Soleyman and Baghdad. Baghdad, city of peace. We'll go chronologically, but I want to quote Joseph Campbell once again. All of the high civilizations of the world, finally, are but so many variants and developments of a single marvelous construct of mythological inspiration here. This was brought into a living form in the mud flats and among the reeds of Mesopotamia hardly more than 5,000 years ago. Eridu. It was revered as the oldest city in Sumeria, that's southern Mesopotamia, Iraq today, by the Euphrates River. Tel means it's an ancient mound of habitation, an archaeological site, really. Ubaid is a smaller archaeological site nearby. They appear to have been constructed in the nearly circular shape and without any fortress types of walls at the perimeter. The original name of Ubaid is unknown. The earliest culture known on the floodplains of southern Mesopotamia is called the Ubaid culture, which dates from about 5900 to 4300 before the Common Era. An agrarian lifestyle, cultivating and growing food with metal plows, using irrigation with canals, their inventions. These were the first settlements in southern Mesopotamia, and these ingenious people built them out of mud bricks, mainly on sand. Here they invented elaborate architecture with columns, arches, and domes, and the first wheel, which was a potter's wheel, the first true mechanical device, and the weaving of textiles too. Ubaid pottery was painted in geometrical designs and often fired at very high temperatures. Other articles include stone sickles and axes, some figurines and craft items, all of baked clay. It's the uniformity of such cultural inventions at all the nearly round Ubaid sites that define the culture as Ubaid. This tell is small, only 400 or 500 meters across, and extends only a few meters above ground level now. They were pre-urban, just living in large village settlements, growing wheat and barley, lentils, and raising sheep, goats, and cattle. The principal site of the Ubaid culture is Eridu, comprising 12 hectares, or 30 acres about, roughly mandalic. It's not clear how intentional the circularity is, and its original name is not known. Here is where they dug and discovered, as Campbell wrote, the orderly round dance of the 5 visible planets and the sun and the moon through the constellations of the zodiac. And so they developed the concept of the year and the yearly calendar with what we call zodiac signs, a mandala. There were large villages of 1,000 or more people with varying house sizes, surrounded by smaller hamlets like this, a development of social hierarchy. And because of the plow, they grew so much food that they could trade it for wood and stone, which had to be imported. But there is no evidence of any palaces or political or coercive authority. All of the towns were unfortified, and there's remarkably little evidence for warfare at the Ubaid sites. Pottery continued in varied shapes, but baked clay tokens in the shape of coins showing animals were now used somehow, and figurines, mostly female, were decorated with painted or applique ornament and lizard-like heads. The municipal role of gods was characteristic, with a temple in the top center of the round town. The patron god of Eridu was Enki, meaning Lord of the sweet waters that flow under the earth. Enki. This local deity became symbolically the owner of the Ubaid town, and its temple served as sort of an ideological and political basis for all later developments and for all the architecture of the town itself. These temples continue to serve as a communal food store, and they provide the basis for later redistribution systems. Unfortunately, the soft mud brick construction did not hold up through the ages. These temples were precursors to the later ziggurats of the region. This culture then stood at the doorway to writing and the first historical records. Prehistoric, preliterate, but inventive, the Ubaid people. And their towns now in ruins, this is where, in Campbell's words, art lived as ritual. Our third town is Tel Brak, some hundreds of years later on. Not much remains of a large round settlement mound in what is northeastern Syria today, in a very fertile basin. The site was occupied by many different peoples between the 4th and 2nd millennia before the Common Era. Rising up to 40 meters, 130 feet in height, and an area of approximately 130 hectares, 320 acres, it is one of the largest archaeological sites in northern Mesopotamia. Built up over many centuries, its original very circular shape became distorted as suburban populations grew and the mud brick structures disintegrated. How consciously designed as round, we have no idea. Estimates range between 17,000 and 24,000 people at its height. It is said to be the first large city in the world, and without defensive fortifications around the perimeter. Cultural evolution of the human race was coming on strong here. Following many hundreds of years of occupation, The tell, or mound, has been partly excavated in the last decades, and a wide variety of structures have been found. We see Mitanni Palace, Naram-Sin Palace, and the Eye Temple. More will surely be found. First, the Semitic Akkadians settled Tel Brak, originally called Nagar. It's located on one of the major ancient trading routes from the Persian Gulf to the south up to Turkey, and between the Tigris River and the Mediterranean Sea to the west. It was Sargon of Akkad who unified the numerous Sumerian city-states, by defeating them, of course, and created the first Mesopotamian empire. This ancient metropolis boasted a flourishing bureaucracy and skilled artisans turning out fine marble chalices and many other luxury goods. And hundreds of these eye idols, found in what is called an eye temple, but we know nothing much of their religious beliefs. It is thought that open eyes like this perhaps symbolize a special devotion to the gods. And many clay tablets like this were found, showing the earliest form of writing which they invented, called cuneiform, mostly used for trade, commerce. But the top left one tells of the birth of King Sargon. Along with thousands of houses, another Akkadian king, Naram-Sin, built a royal residence there, and a monumental palace complex, even with a sanitation system. But the most interesting building excavated so far was in the industrial zone, dating to the very earliest period there. The Red Industrial Building, it was called, with craft workshops for making utilitarian things and round ovens for firing clay bowls and other kinds of objects. The ovens here are at the lower left. This was just excavated in 2006. Much more is still to be uncovered, surely. Some of the items found include mother-of-pearl inlays, ground obsidian discs and blades, upper left, perhaps used as money, a long brown flint blade, and a very tall chalice made of obsidian and white marble, and even clay impressions of two different lion seals, as they're called. Lions indicated royalty. Then a later Indo-Iranian empire called Mitanni, with Indo-Aryan rulers, not Semites, flourished here from about 1500 on, for most of 3 centuries really. Here the invention of the sail was created for use on boats, for trading goods and food in exchange for other items like metal, wood, and linen. What is left of the Mitannian palace? These Mitanni folks were the first to invent mathematical number systems and the concept of zero. One was the decimal system, based on 10 fingers used for trade and business accounts. The other was for ritually measuring space and time, and was based on the number 60, just as our minutes in an hour and seconds in a minute. And 360 degrees still represents the circumference of the circle, the mandala of space. And 360 days plus 5 mark the measurement of the mandala of time, the cycle of the year, as Joseph Campbell says. They built a large temple complex for a god named Samakwan. This incorporated official offices and large courtyards. It was here that glass making was invented, along with musical instruments like the lyre. This temple is also important for its use of typically Mesopotamian decorative motifs, as we see in the upper left and lower right. This temple complex was also involved with the care and breeding of donkey onager hybrids used for drawing wheeled carts, since now the wheel was developed for farming and for chariots. Horses came later. Even pull-along toys with wheels were made for kids. Tel Brak is now known as one of the earliest large urban sites in Mesopotamia and in the entire world. Still prehistoric, but with a written language, and originally a circular city with many temples to their many gods, occupied until 1360. So the historic Sasanian period begins with 3 round cities in Iran. Firuzabad, originally Ardeshir Quara, was built as an exactly Mandalic capital and religious city in southwestern Iran in the early 200s by the Sasanian king Ardeshir. He was Indo-Aryan, like the Mitanni of Brak, but a Zoroastrian, believer in one god only. The Sasanian Empire was huge, from modern-day Iraq all the way over to India. The round ruins are located just south of the later Persian city, Shiraz. The early name referred to the glory of Ardeshir, but was later changed to Firuzabad after the Arab Islamic conquest of the empire. The modern city of Firuzabad is actually nearby, and the ruins are largely undisturbed. It has a plan almost 2 kilometers in diameter, so precise in measurement that a Persian historian wrote that it was devised using a compass, a very conscious circle. Originally surrounded by a large mud wall and ditch, the city was divided into 20 sectors by a precise geometric system of 20 radials and several concentric streets, and had 4 quadrants and 4 gates toward the cardinal directions. They were the Hormuz Gate, the Ardeshir Gate, the Mithra Gate, and the Bahram Gate. The royal capital's compounds were constructed at the center of a circle, exactly 1,950 meters in diameter. This shows the enthronement of Emperor Ardeshir by the god Ahura Mazda, both on horseback. Their horses trample on evil spirits, illustrating that the king in the material world and the god in the spiritual world had similar roles. That is, the vanquishing of opposition and evil, and restoration of order in both worlds. His name actually means he rules truth, Arde. A coin depicting Ardeshir and his palace, which took on grandiose proportions. Part of a general renaissance in building, using massive barrel vaults, groin vaults, the squinch, huge arches and domes. New discoveries in structure, really. It is the oldest extant example of Sasanian architecture. After Ardeshir's son, Shapur, defeated the armies of 3 Roman emperors in the 300s, refugee Roman Christians and Jews came here to escape oppression. They could exercise their faith freely under Sasanian rule, not under Roman rule, because of its Zoroastrian monotheistic religion. Even scholarship was encouraged by the state, and works from both the East and West were translated into Sasanian Indo-European language. Besides other crafts, metalwork became highly sophisticated now, as we see here from excavations. Now, at the center point of the city was a kind of ziggurat, actually a Zoroastrian fire temple, 30 meters, 98 feet high, in a squared spiral design like this. It's thought to have been the architectural predecessor of the huge spiral minaret of the great Mosque of Samarra of Iraq, done later on. So the very center was a high tower, topped by a Zoroastrian fire altar, the sacred fire, a mandala with a sacred center of fire. Although circular Firuzabad was destroyed by the Arab invasion, it has been registered with UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. Our 5th city, an exactly circular one, was Darabgerd, located just east of Firuzabad, Iran. The suffix gerd in Persian means round or circular place, so Darabgerd means round city of Darab. Although the site was occupied hundreds of years before, it flourished in the Sasanian period of the 3rd to 7th centuries of the Common Era, likely influenced by the very round Firuzabad. And the people were Indo-Aryans also, and Zoroastrians too, believers in one god. The main ruins of the town being excavated are Sasanian, all enclosed by a circular fortification with a large mountain cluster in the middle. The round layout was 1.6 kilometers, or about a mile in diameter, with a citadel and fire temple crowning a central rock peak. It's near the modern city of Darab. Circular fortifications included a rampart 10 meters high originally, and a canal around it, 10 meters deep and 50 meters wide. They were for defense and for irrigation purposes too. There were 4 gates to the outside and 4 main streets inside, serving a residential zone. So it was designed around the largest mountain as the center. Very little of Darabgerd has been excavated so far, and the mud brick used to hold some stones together has mostly become mud. Most of the artifacts found were ceramics, along with pottery kilns and metalworking sites, and a few coins. The government citadel, once located high at the center of the city, included the important Zoroastrian fire temple for worship, now all mud bricks, ruins. The manufacturing was largely concentrated in the southwest district, suggesting it was an industrial zone, and separately was a residential one. Then, like Firuzabad, the very Mandalic city of Darabgerd reached its peak during the Sasanian era, destroyed during the conquest of Iran by the Arabs, mid-600s. Most of it is still to be excavated. Shiz, a nearly circular city, and our next to the last one, was constructed a bit later during the Sasanian dynasty with a prominent Zoroastrian fire temple complex. Made of mud brick, baked brick, and stone, it's mostly a ruins now. Shiz was later called Takht-e-Soleyman, the throne of Solomon. Sasanian Empire again. Like the others, it's mainly an archaeological site since the 14th century. In far western Iran today, it's believed to have been the birthplace of Zoroaster, who preached the existence of one God supreme. With a deep, beautiful spring-fed lake, Takht-e-Soleyman sits within a rather oval outcropping of limestone high above the valley, built up by the calcium sediments of the water flowing out of a thermal spring, warm spring lake, more than 60 meters deep, 200 feet. The site itself is the center of several groups of ruins. Each was devoted to Zoroastrian worship. The palace and temple complex and lake. A thick wall of mud brick, interspersed with semicircular bastions, was constructed around the entire perimeter on the crater rim. Gates were located on the north, south, and southeast sections of the wall. A revival of Iranian nationalism took place under late Sasanian rulers. Zoroastrianism became the state religion now. The government was centralized, and roads, city building, and even agriculture were financed by the government. Takht-e-Soleyman has not yet been fully excavated, but some beautiful metalworks have been found, even a silk twill textile, upper right, all late Sasanian art. Shiz got the Semitic name, Throne of Solomon, after the Arab-Islamic conquest of Persia in the 600s. Many folk legends evolved then relating to King Solomon's dealing with monsters and creating the flowing pond, etc. The Arabs sought to destroy anything Zoroastrian or Persian, being contrary to Islam. In order to avoid this, the Persians changed the names of many sites and monuments in order to save them from destruction. The central fire temple was originally constructed of mud brick, but was rebuilt of stone and fired bricks in later centuries. This sacred fire temple, here circled in red, provided the fire for other fire temples in the empire. Upper left is a silver coin of another of the crowned kings, showing a symbolic fire altar with attendants. As the principal Zoroastrian sanctuary, Takht-e-Soleyman is the foremost site associated with one of the early monotheistic religions of the world. The large multi-roomed temple housing the altar is the central building of the complex. It is located just inside the city's northern gate. The designs of the fire temple, the palace, and the general layout here strongly influenced the development of Islamic architecture. It was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Here's their honorific plaque. The whole town of Shiz, Takht-e-Soleyman, stretched out about 550 meters across, 1,800 feet. and rises up from the surrounding landscape to about 60 meters or 200 feet. The overflow of the pond has always provided residents of the area with water for surrounding fields, which are especially fertile. Last is Baghdad. This is the earliest plan for the city of Baghdad, built by 767 near the Tigris River, at a point scarcely 40 kilometers from the Euphrates, where the two rivers were connected by canals. The spiritual head of Islam, the Arab Caliph Mansur, commissioned it to begin. It was designed by two Persian architects, one born a Zoroastrian, the other born a Jew. Baghdad was first planned with ash drawings on the ground for al-Mansur to view prior to construction. It was a walled, fortified city set among an extensive network of canals, measuring 2.6 kilometers, about 1.6 miles in diameter. It was apparently inspired by Firuzabad, Darabgerd, or Takht-e-Soleyman from centuries before. It was a religious Islamic city from the beginning, and very consciously designed as a mandala. So in the center there was a mosque and a palace for al-Mansur, who moved his capital from Damascus then to Baghdad here. Religion and power together again. It featured four main gates, equidistant from each other, named by the city they faced: Kufa, Basra, Khorasan, and Damascus, or the Syrian gate. The walls were constructed out of mud brick with reed supports, while the domes and vaults were composed of baked brick. The focal point of the round city was a royal precinct containing the palace, a central congregational mosque, ministries, and barracks. This was the capital of the entire Islamic world from the 8th century to the 13th century, Baghdad. The residential area with houses, stores, and roads was partitioned into quadrants and subdivided again between the central palace with mosque and fortifications, all of perishable mud bricks, however. Water from the Tigris River surrounded it as a moat. An outer and inner ring road flanked these quarters. It was called then Madinat al-Salam, the City of Peace. The name Baghdad came later as a combination of two Persian words meaning founded by God. Ancient Baghdad is buried beneath the modern city here, and almost all we know of it comes from contemporary writers. City of Peace, founded by God, originally designed as a mandala. So we have briefly visited these Near Eastern circular towns and cities from very early prehistoric times to the Islamic era. Could they have been precursors or had some influence on later circular, idealistic, and imagined town plans of literature and of Renaissance Europe, some even built? Part 2 will be the next DVD, Ideal and Utopian Cities of European Thought, but all unbuilt, from Plato's Atlantis to Francis Bacon's New Atlantis.